Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Pe Aleph, a new Mishnah. Mi shenitchayev b'shtei mitot betin, nidon b'chamura. If someone committed two transgressions, and he is liable to two different forms of capital punishment for each of the transgressions. For example, let's say he committed avodah zarah, and he's liable to sikila for that. And then he murdered someone, and he's liable to hereg for that. So you can't kill him twice, you can't give him both capital punishments, so we have to pick one. Which one do we pick? We pick the more stringent one. In that example, we would give him sikila. Avad avera shenitchayev shete mitot nidon b'chamura. And let's say he made one sin, but that one sin involves two separate prohibitions with two different capital punishments. For example, he had relations with his mother-in-law who was married. So that's a problem of adva, of mother-in-law. That's the punishment for that is serefa. But if she's married, that's also adultery, and that is standard chenek. So which punishment? We can only kill him once. He gets the more stringent one, which in that case would be serefa. Rabbi Yosef omer nidon bezika rishona sheba alav. Rabbi Yosef disagrees with this last case and says that we give him only one punishment, of course, but it's not the more stringent one necessarily. It's the relationship that came first upon him. In other words, let's say his mother-in-law was married, she was always married, and had the daughter, and he married the daughter. In that case, the mother-in-law was already prohibited to him before he got married because she's a married woman. And therefore, that's adultery. Adultery comes first. That's chenek that comes first. And afterwards, he marries the daughter, and now she's a mother-in-law, which is serefa. Rabbi Yosef says we go by the first relationship that's prohibited, and that was chenek because of adultery. So, since even before they're married, he's prohibited to her by adultery, so therefore that prohibition sticks, that remains, and the serefa one does not apply on top of it. Whereas, let's say the other way around. Let's say she had a daughter and her husband died. Okay, now she's single. Technically, this man could marry her, his future mother-in-law, before he marries the wife, or he could marry the wife. I mean, they're both permitted to him. And then he marries the daughter. Good. Now that he marries the daughter, his mother-in-law becomes prohibited to him as a mother-in-law, which is serefa. Let's say after the daughter and this guy get married, then the mother-in-law gets remarried. Good. But now she's also eshet ish. However, that relationship, that prohibition came second. So since he was first prohibited to her by serefa, in that case he gets serefa. So the Rabbi Yosef says it's not necessarily the stringent one, it's whichever prohibition applied to them first. Good. Peshita. Now we ask about the resha. If someone did two things, committed avodah zarah and murdered someone, isn't it obvious that you would give him the more stringent punishment? Ela itagur. What would you think? That it changes? If it changes, that means there could be a case where he would profit from sinning further. Let's say he did avodah zarah. Now he's going to get sikila. So the guy's like all worried. Oh no, I'm going to get sikila, the worst type of capital punishment. You know what I could do to make it easier for myself? I could murder someone. And then if I murder someone, I'll get the lesser punishment of a hereg. So then that would be encouraging him to go and commit another crime for which the capital punishment is lesser. It doesn't make sense that someone should profit from another crime. So it has to be as obvious that we're going to give someone the more stringent capital punishment if they are liable to both of them because of two different transgressions. So it's obvious. Why does Mishnah even have to teach us this? אמר רבא, החיב מעסקינן, כגון שעבר עבירה קלה, ונגמר דינו על עבירה קלה, וחזר ועבר עבירה חמורה. סקא דעתך אמינא, כיוון דנגמר דינו לעבירה קלה, היי גברא כתילהו, כמשמע לן. So Rava explains, in the case that I just said, in fact, it would be obvious. If he did a sikila prohibition first, then the sikila prohibition is going to stay. It doesn't make sense that you do a second prohibition that's a lesser one and then get a lesser punishment. So obviously it's going to stick with the highest one. But you know why the Mishnah needs to teach us this law? For the other way around. Let's say first he does a lesser sin. Let's say murder, which is only chenek. It's still pretty bad, of course, which is only hereg. So he murders someone and he gets hereg. And the verdict came in and they gave him the verdict, and that he's he's going to be killed. For some reason, they don't kill him right away, and he goes and has an opportunity to do another sin that's even more stringent. I guess, while he's still waiting in jail for them to take him out and get beheaded, he goes and he gets an idol and he worships the idol, and now he's liable to sikila. Here is the chidush. I might have thought, since the verdict already came down for hereg, so that's it. He's already a dead man. You can't kill him twice. You might have thought you go by the first thing that he did, and just because he does another sin afterwards as sikila, no, he's already a dead man. We're already going to chop off his head. So that's sufficient. You might have thought that you stick with that. And so the Mishnah teaches not so. If he has an opportunity to go and worship Avodah Zarah before he gets killed, you know what we do? We bring him back to court, retry him for Avodah Zarah, and upgrade his capital punishment to Sekila. Be'amine Abu de Rav Yosef bar Chama berabba bar Natan. So Abu, the father of Rav Yosef bar Chama, asked Rabbah bar Natan, what's the source for this law that the rabbi said that if you're liable to two different forms of capital punishment, then you get the more stringent one, and for multiple transgressions? Tichtiv v'holid ben Paris, shofech dam v'gomer el harim achal ve'eleshet rehu timeh ve'legilulim nasa enav. We have to look at the context of these pesukim. It is very important. This is from Yechezkel, chapter 18, a very famous perek that talks about individual punishment, and it starts off quoting people. People say a proverb that says the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. The idea of vicarious punishment, that children will be punished because of the sins of their fathers. People are quoting this mashal. However, Yechezkel says it's not true. Right? He quotes Hashem saying, right, by my life, nobody will say this mashal anymore because it's not true. Hen kol nefashot li hena, kanefesh ha'av, kanefesh ha'ben. All the souls, all lives are mine. Hashem says the soul of the father, the soul of the son is all mine. I care about everybody equally, and therefore here's a new principle that you should remember: hanefesh hachotet hi tamut. Whoever sins will die. But if you didn't sin, you won't die. Individual reward and suffering. And then it brings examples. We're going to quote these pisukim in just a minute. The positive pisukim, and then we're going to see negative pisukim. If someone is ki yes sadik, v'asa mishpat ustaka, elarim lo achal. If someone is righteous and he does what's lawful and right, he doesn't eat on mountains. Apparently this was a form of avodah zarah, to take some food up to the mountains and as a offering to some god. Ve'enav lo nasad gilulei bet Yisrael. He didn't lift his eyes up to the idols that Israel used to worship. And eleshet rehu lo timeh. He doesn't commit adultery. He doesn't come close to isha nida lo yikrav. And also he doesn't oppress people and commits no robbery. He gives bread to the hungry, covers the naked with his garments, and he doesn't give out money with interest or accept any increase. He withdraws him from iniquity. He does good between man and man. If he follows the laws, that person is called a tzaddik. He is righteous and he will live. Good. So that's principle number one. A good person will live. It doesn't matter who his father is or anything else. Now, if that righteous person has an evil son, Holid ben Paris, shofech dam, ve'asa ach, u'me'achad me'ele. If Basan, who is a robber, a shedder of blood, he has done any of these things, and all the positive things we just mentioned, he doesn't follow them. Kigam el harim achal, eshet rehu timeh. He goes up and does idolatry on the top of a mountain, eating some offering of food there, and he defiles his neighbor's wife. He's a thief and treats people badly. Gilulim nasanav, and he lifts his eyes up to avodah zarah also, and also charges interest and so on. Then that person lo yichyeh et kol adavot ha'ele asa mot yumat damav bo yihyeh. He will not live, he will die. Mot yumat. In general, we make a gezerah shavah that means sikila. Then it goes on. We're not going to see this part. If that bad child has a son, and the son is a good, then that grandchild, the good one, will get reward. In other words, each generation, each person will be judged on his own merit or demerit, and we're not going to transfer punishment from one generation to the next. That is the context of Yechezkel. So now we're quoting The pisuk came from the second generation here, who is an evil son. So let's see what this means. V'holid ben parish shofech dam b'saif. So he's a murderer. Well, what capital punishment would he get for being a murderer? Headache. He's chopped off his head with a sword. Et eshet rehu timeh zo eshet ish bechenek. He defiled his friend's wife. Well, that's adultery, and for that he would get strangulation. That's a different second form of capital punishment. V'im et kved gilulim nasa anav zavodah zarah b'ski. He lifted his eyes up to idolatry. That would be avodah zarah. So that's sikilah. Now, so we have three different types of capital punishment mentioned in this, in these series of pisukim. Now, what punishment is he going to get? He violated all of these things. The Yechezkel is describing a really evil person that did all these major transgressions. So what punishment will he get in the end? So he gets motumat amabo. That phrase, motumat amabo, we learned already, is a gezer hashava, that means sikila. So sikila is the worst form of capital punishment, even though he deserves chenek also, and saif also, but he gets sikila because that's the worst of the three things that he did. So that's the proof. Now we have a challenge to this proof. Matkif ladav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Ema kulahu b'skila ve'holid ben parish shofech dam ze ben sorer moreh. Hold on, we can interpret all the things in this pasuk as being transgressions that all require sikila. So, because he says he gave birth to a child, a violent son, who's shedder of blood, that could be a reference to that, the fact that the son is a ben sorer umoreh. He's called shofech dam because he will grow up and be a shofech dam, and so we judge him now, even though he hasn't murdered yet, because he will murder. He's also responsible for his own death by doing all these things to make his parents bring him in. So biskila, ben sorer moreh gets sikila, and so this son is a ben sorer moreh. That's one count. Eshet reu timeh zo na'ara ma'orasa. Now he committed adultery, but let's say he committed adultery with a na'ara ma'orasa. De biskila, that's also sikila. Ve'ed gilulim nasa av enav zo avodah zarah de biskila, and so he did idolatry. That's the same as one before, but that's also sikila. So therefore, you cannot prove from this pasuk that if you have different forms of capital punishment, you get the worst one, because we can interpret the three different sins here as all being sins that require sikila. So of course he's going to get sikila. But if it was different types of capital punishment, then maybe he would get something else. So that's a challenge to the proof, but we're going to revive it. Im ken mai kamash malan Yechezkel. Wait a second. If Yechezkel is not teaching us anything new, then why is he saying it to us? If you follow the proof that we said before, Yechezkel is giving us a chidush that you give the most stringent form of capital punishment. But for all the same punishment, then obvious you're going to give him sikila. Dilma Torah mehader. So maybe you'll say he's just reiterating what the Torah said. If he wants to admonish the people, we know these laws. We know that they're not allowed. We know what the punishment will be. But he's just telling them, listen, there might be people that are thinking they can get away with this because they have a good father, a good grandfather. No, not true. He's just repeating the Torah law, but maybe it's no chidush. We ask about that. No, if he's just repeating what the Torah said, then he should have reiterated it in the same way that Moshe taught it. Right? If you want to teach the laws of the Torah, just quote the Pesukim of the Torah. You're going to summarize the Torah better than the original. So then Yechezkel should have just taught the original, which is quite an amazing thing. It means that we have lots of the words of Nevi'im, but could be that half the time, or even more, they were just reading Torah to the people. Here, look what it says. Make sure to keep these things. Nevi'im are not going to cite all that because we already have the Torah, so it doesn't need to cite a repetition of the Torah. But most of the time, could be that they were they were repeating the Torah because that was necessary. But here, Yechezkel is saying different words, so it must be he's giving us a chidush, and therefore this is in fact a good proof that Yechezkel wants to teach us a chidush. And what's the chidush? It's that if you do various sins that are liable to various forms of capital punishment, then you get the most severe form of punishment. Darash Ravacha b'Rabbi Chanina. My dichtiv el harim lo achal shelo achal bezchut avotav. And now we continue, since we quoted this Pesukim, we continue with the Darasha on the first section of Pesukim about the righteous person. What did he do? He did not eat upon the mountains. Now, a question about this list, these things are pretty grievous things. So are you going to tell me that someone who doesn't do avodah zarah and doesn't do idolatry and so on, so then he's a tzaddik? So this Rasha does, it interprets these major sins as being things that are actually more subtle to increase the level that you need to be called a tzaddik. So when it says he didn't eat upon the mountains, it means he didn't eat into the merits of his fathers. He didn't rely on the merits of his fathers, but rather he made sure that he would be righteous himself. Hehadim would be a reference to the forefathers, the great ones that we look up to, and so he didn't rely on that, but rather he's good in and of with his own actions. And the fact that he didn't do idolatry, what, you want to give him a big chazak baruch? Wow, what a tzaddik! You didn't do idolatry? Of course he can't do idolatry. So this is a reference to that he didn't walk in a haughty way. Those who follow idolatry, they also have a sense of haughtiness, and so this, we're not talking about, of course he didn't do idolatry, but he didn't even walk in a haughty way. What, you're giving him such high praise? He's a tzaddik because he didn't commit adultery? Of course you can't do that. But this is a reference not only to adultery, but also stealing someone's business. He didn't infringe on someone else's trade and go and open a competition right next door to him and undercut his prices and so on, because just like you can't steal someone's wife, so too his livelihood. And also, when it says he didn't come close to Isha Nida, that's a reference to that he didn't benefit from a charity fund. Just like Isha Nida is someone that you keep away from. This harchakot, you keep away from it, even though eventually she's your wife and she'll be permitted to you, but you should stay away. So too, a kupas shel tzedakah, you should stay away from, even though if someone is really poor, it's permitted, right? So there could be a time when it will be permitted. Also, maybe you contributed to the tzedakah fund in the first place. So even though there are circumstances where it's permitted, he treats it like nidah and says, stay far away. I'm not going to take from communal funds. I'll go find a way, some other way, in order, even if I'm poor, in order to feed myself and my family. Uchtiv sadik hu hayo yichyeh. Kishaya Rabban Gamaliel magiel lemikra hazeh haya bochev amar man de'abed dilchu lehu hu dechayeh bechad aminai hu la. And the pasuk says, if someone does all these things, then he is a righteous person and he will live. When Rabban Gamaliel read these pesukim, he would cry, and because he said, only someone who does all of these things, he has to perform everything on the list, then he will live and he would get reward. But what if someone does only one of them, but not all of them, then he won't, right? Who could be so worthy? There's a lot of things on this list, right? And he always treated his other people well and didn't charge interest and so on. So that means you have to do all of them in order to be a tzaddik and live. It's going to be very hard, even for a great person like Gamliel. He's afraid maybe he didn't fulfill everything on the list, and so he would cry. אמר לרבי עקיבא, אלא מעתה אל תטמאו בכל אלה, הכי נמה בכולהו אין בחד המיני הולה, אלא באחד מכל אלה, הכי נמה באחד מכל אלה. Rabbi Akiva, however, cheered him up, and he says, just because it says all, it doesn't mean that you have to actually do all of them in order to be called a tzaddik. And he gives an example in Vayikra 18 that lists all the prohibited relations of arayot. It says, do not defile yourself with all of these. Now, if you say all means you have to do all of them, are you going to tell me that you're not liable to incest unless you violate all the list of incest, right? Mother and sister and aunt and all, every single one, and otherwise you're okay if you only did one of them or two of them? Obviously not. Rather, it means one of these. Do not make yourself impure, but defile yourself by committing any one of these sins. If that's true for the negative, it's also true for the positive. Here in this pasuk, if someone is very careful and they perform one of these mitzvot, they act in a righteous way and they keep away from one of these things, like walking in a haughty manner, or the other items that we just mentioned, then that deserves reward, and that person will be called a tzaddik. Of course, you have to try to do everything, and it wouldn't be a perfect tzaddik if he's violating other ones. But even if you do one of these well, then that's already considered meritorious, and a person would deserve reward for that one thing. And don't worry if you're missing something; nobody's perfect. but as long as you're striving to do everything on this list, and you do even one of them, will deserve the proper reward. Avad Avera. Now we go to the next part of the Mishnah that says if he did one transgression for which one is liable to two different capital punishments, then he also gets the worst of them. Tanya Kesad Amar Rabbi Yoseh Nidon Bezikah Rishona Ba'alav. And Rabbi Yoseh disagreed with Tanakama in the Mishnah, and here's a Baraita that expands on Rabbi Yoseh's opinion. He says that one gets only the type of capital punishment that he will deserve for the first relationship that applies to him. How so? Chamoto v'naset eshet ish nidon b'chamoto. If first this woman was his mother-in-law before, and at that time that it became mother-in-law, his mother-in-law was single, and then his mother-in-law got married after this guy married the daughter of that person, his wife, then he will be killed with serefa, because he was prohibited to her as a mother-in-law first, and only then as an eshet ish. Whereas et ish v'naset chamoto nidon be'eshet ish. If she was first a married woman, that is, before this man got married to his wife, the mother-in-law was married, a normal case, and then he got married to her, since he was prohibited to her even before he got married as eshet ish, therefore he will get chenek and not serefa. Amar le Rav Ada bar Abba le Rava, chamoto v'naset eshet ish nidon b'chamoto, nidon name ha'isur eshet ish, teha amar Rabbi Abhu, modeh Rabbi Yosef b'isur mosif. However, Rav Ada bar Rava said to Rava, I have a question about this. When you say that she was already, let's say she was first his mother-in-law, and only then she got married afterwards, and then become eshet ish, so the law is the law really that he only gets killed as serefa because of mother-in-law? Why shouldn't he also deserve a punishment for eshet ish? Because after all, Rabbi Abhu said that Rabbi Yoseh agrees regarding isur mosif. This is a machloket about isur chal al isur. There is a general principle that if something is already prohibited because of one prohibition, then you can't add on another prohibition. And so whichever prohibition was there first, the second one can't add on to it. It's already prohibited. It's not room for two prohibitions on the same thing. So whichever one was first, that's the one that one gets punished for. So that would be a general rule. And Rabbi Yosef says, and isur chal al isur. However, Rabbi Abu says, Rabbi Yosef makes an exception if the second isur is more expanded, which it is in this case, because when the mother, when she was single, she was prohibited to the son-in-law because of the son-in-law, mother-in-law prohibition. When she gets married, the new prohibition of eshet ish applies to many more people than just the relatives of his daughter. And therefore, since it's isur mosif that applies to actually every man in the whole world, beforehand she was prohibited just to a son-in-law and relatives and so on. But now she's prohibited to every man in the world as eshet ish. And Rabbi Yosef agrees that if the second prohibition is more expansive, then it does apply. And so the second one should also apply. Amale Ada beri bitre katli katatle. Rava said to him, Ada, my son, but what, you're going to kill the guy twice? You can't kill a person twice. So theoretically, you're right that the second prohibition also applies, but the idea here is that since the first prohibition came first, so she's already prohibited to her as mother-in-law, and that's serefa. So that's it. That's the capital punishment that applies. And the second one, although it is more expansive, and yes, he is theoretically liable also for eshet ish, but once we kill him the first time, that's it. He's already dead, and we cannot kill him a second time. Now that we saw a case of someone who deserves multiple capital punishments, we're going to talk about someone who deserves lashes multiple times. Mishelaka veshana, betin machnisin oto lakipa. Someone who transgresses a sin that he deserves lashes for, and then he does the same sin again, and he gets lashes again, and then he does the same sin a third time, so he's not getting the point from lashes. So therefore, the court has to step it up, and they put him into a kippah, into a vault, a chamber, a jail. And we feed him just barley until the barley expands in his stomach and his stomach ruptures, and eventually he'll die. So it's not direct capital punishment, but it's pretty gruesome and painful and indirect. So this is not official capital punishment, but unofficial capital punishment for the person that doesn't learn the lesson after getting lashes already twice. Mishum de lakav shana betin konsinu to lekipa. Gemara asks, okay, I understand he did something wrong, right? He made a sin that's deserving of lashes, but just because he did that twice and he got lashes twice, and then he sinned again, so he deserves this kind of death? Why are we so stringent upon him? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, shacha b'malkuyot shel kiretot askinan, tegavra bar ketalahu. And so Rabbi Yirmiyah says, name of Resh Lakish, we're talking about malkut that he deserves for something that is worthy of getting karet. So let's say he eats chaylev. So this would be karet, and really that's kind of the deserving of death, bideh shamayim. So really he's deserving of death. V'karobehu de la mikrab ketaleh. However, the Bet Din doesn't give him the death penalty for the first time because this is karet, which is mita bideh shamayim, and so therefore the court is not going to kill him. But whenever someone is deserving of karet, they can get lashes instead, which they may prefer because they don't want to get karet and their life cut short and whatever else the consequences of karet are. They say, okay, give me lashes, and so the court will give him lashes in lieu of karet. Okay, good. So he got that once, he got that twice, and he still doesn't listen. So you know what? He is actually deserving of death. We just didn't do it because generally a Bet Din doesn't give the death penalty because this is karet is up to heaven. But now they didn't listen 3 times, so now we are going to kill him. It's not capital punishment in one of the regular 4 ways, and so we kill him in this indirect way. It's this person's own fault because he surrenders his life. Doesn't he know that he's doing something that's a very serious prohibition that is worthy of karet? And so he learned the lesson, obviously. He was warned, and to get lashes, you have to be warned. And he says, yes, I know, I'm going to get lashes, and afal pichen, I'm going to do it. We warn him again. So he knows this is a chiyuv karet. He knows they'll get lashes or karet. And he does it for the 3rd time, so he's surrendering his own life. He's at fault. And so by that time, we advance his execution, and we put him in the chamber, and we feed him barley. And now a further explanation of why he deserves death, even though it's just a sin of lashes. Taz beralach. B'malkuyot shel karet achat, aval shel shetayim v'shel shalosh keretot, isur hu deka ta'im, v'la mevater kol ahai. And we only give a person this type of death penalty if he repeatedly did the same sin for which one is liable to karet. He repeatedly eats chelev. He ate it again. 3 times. Okay, so obviously he's not getting the lesson, and he doesn't care about his life, and that shows that, okay, his person really deserves to die. However, if he does 2 or 3 different transgressions, he did ate chaleb 1 time, and then he had relations with a nida 1 time. So these are various different prohibitions. So then he just wants to experience sin. He's an adventurer in sin, and that's also bad, but he gets the punishment for this, he gets the punishment for that, but he's not a repeat offender in the very same thing. So in that case, we don't say that he is surrendering his life to that extent. He gave in to his passions regarding this and regarding that, and he can't help himself from having this and that experience. So even though it's multiple sins, but it's different sins. But if it's the same sin multiple times, then he's not going to learn his lesson by giving lashes again and again. Therefore, it shows that he doesn't care about his own life, and he deserves to be put in this vaulted chamber. Mishalaka veshana. Now back to the Mishnah that says if someone, he sinned once and he got lashes for that, and then shana, does shana mean a second time he sinned or a second time he got lashes? So let's say it means he sinned for the second time. So he did sin, lashes, sin. And then you're already going to put him into the kippah. Shana afagav de lo shilesh. So it seems like if he just sinned the second time, we already put him into the kippah, even if he did not sin a 3rd time. So if we follow that interpretation, then lema matnitin de lo Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Di Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel ha'amad ad telat zimne lahavya chazaka. In general, there's a machloket between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, where Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says you can make a chazaka after 2 times of something happening, and Rashbag says 3 times. So it seems that our Mishnah is not the opinion of Rashbag, because Rashbag says you have to do something 3 times in order to establish a chazaka. So then, according to Rashbag, it should be that he sins, lashes, lashes, and then if he sins again after that, only then you put him into kippah, because now he's a chazakah, he's going to keep sinning. But if it's only sin, lashes sin, then that would be to be, but it would not be consistent with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So is that true that this Mishnah is not Rashbag? Amar Ravina, afilu tema Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, kasavad averot mahazikot. Ravina says we can even say it is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and we could say that it's the sins that create a chazakah. So what happened is he sinned, he got lashes, he sinned, he got lashes again. That's what it means, shana. He got lashes again, and then the sin is the third time he sins, then he goes and he goes into the kippah. So if we interpret Misha Laka V'Shana like that he got lashes twice and then sinned again after that, then it is in fact consistent with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Me'tibe, now we challenge this interpretation from a baraita that says, Avar avera sheyesh ba malkut pam rishona ushniya malkinoto. If someone violates a sin for which one is liable to lashes, and he does it once and twice, so we give him lashes. He did sin, lashes, Ushlishit konsinoto la kippah. When he sins for the third time, then we put him in the kippah. That's Tanakh Kama. Abba Shaul Omer, Af Bashirishit Malkin Oto, Barviit Konsinoto La Kippah. Abba Shaul says we give him lashes 3 times. So sin, lashes, sin, lashes, sin, lashes, and then sin again for the 4th time. Only then do we put him in the kippah. My love, the Kula Ama Malkiot Mahazikot. So it seems that everybody agrees that when we're counting, right, you need a chazakah in order to put the person into a kippah. We have to know he's a regular sinner, he's a pattern of sinning. So the question is the pattern created by the sin, right? So that would be what we said before, that averot machazikot, and so it could be Rashbag, and the Mishnah says that he'd sinned, lashes, sinned, lashes again. That's what Shana means, lashes again, and then sin the 3rd time. So it's 3 times sin, and then after the 3rd time he sinned, then he goes into kippah. That's how we interpreted it before. But here we see that, that's Tanakh Kama, but then Abba Shaul says another round, 3 times lashes, and then a 4th sin. So it seems that everybody agrees that it's not the sin that creates the chazakah, but rather that lashes that create the chazakah. He has to be given lashes 3 times, and only after that, now he's a chazakah that he's going to be a sinner. And if he sins a 4th time, then we put him into a kippah. And if so what's the machlok between Tanakh Kama and Abba Shaul? It's the machlok is parallel to that of Rabbi and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi says you create a pattern after 2 times, so that means after he gets lashes twice, then he sins a 3rd time, he goes into the kippah. Whereas, according to Rashbag, you need 3 times to make a chazakah. So that means he has to get lashes 3 times, and the 4th time, then he goes into the kippah, and that would be consistent with Abba Shaul. So this is a challenge to the way that Ravina interpreted our Mishnah, because he said that our Mishnah can be Rashbag if you follow averot machazikot. But according to this, who would Abba Shaul go like? It has to be that the Abba Shaul is the same as Rashbag, and it's Malkiyot Mahazikot. So we answer, Lo, Tekula Amma Itlehud Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. In fact, both the opinions here follow Rashbag, and the Tanakh Kama will be consistent with our Mishnah, and the Machloket is within the Rashbag. Vacha behakami palge. The more sabar averot machazikot, the more sabar malkiyot machazikot. Tanakh Kama thinks that to make a chazakah, you have to do the sin 3 times. So that's sin, lashes, sin, Oh, you did the sin 3 times. Now that's it. The chazakah is finished, and now you go into a kippah. And that's what Rashbag says, according to Tanakh Kama, and is also what the Mishnah says, also within the Rashbag. However, Abba Shaul interprets Rashbag differently, and he says, no, it's the lashes that create the chazakah. Therefore, you need sin, lashes, sin, lashes, sin, lashes, and only after you get lashes 3 times, then there's the chazakah. So if you sin again once more, a 4th time, only then do you go into a kippah. But in fact, we can interpret everything within Rashbag. We now challenge that interpretation based on another braita. Let's say someone is about to make a sin that would be liable to lashes, and the witnesses see him, and they give him a warning. but he doesn't acknowledge the warning. He's quiet and he does the sin. We can't give him lashes in that case. Or if the witnesses gave him lashes and he nodded his head, it's still not good enough, because you can't give him lashes unless he hears the warning and he says, I know, and almanat ken, I am going to sin on that condition. I accept upon myself lashes. I'm going to do it anyway. So he didn't acknowledge the warning, and therefore we can't actually give him lashes. So what do we do then? And he's a repeated offender. So pam rishona ushniya matrin bo shilishit on konsino tola kippah. It's machloket. According to Tanna Kama, we give him a warning anyway. We gave him a warning once. He went and he ate the cheleb. We gave him a warning again, and he went and ate the cheleb a second time. We didn't give him lashes because the warning was not accepted. And then he does it a third time, then we put him into the kippah. Right? That we can do, even though he didn't accept the warning, but he's not accepting warnings. So you're just going to let him keep doing it without punishment because he doesn't accept the warnings? Right, he doesn't get lashes, but by the third time, he still goes into the kippah. Abba Shaul omer, af beshlishit matrin bo, konsinoto la kippah. Abba Shaul says, no, if we gave him the warning and he didn't accept the warning, so then he sins, no lashes. Sins a second time, no lashes. A third time, no lashes, even though we're giving him a warning each time, but he didn't accept the warning, so we can't kill him. So then if he does it for a fourth time, he does that same sin, then we put him into a kippah only after the fourth time. Now this is Tanna Kama and Abba Shaul, but this Baraita is a challenge to the interpretation we just said here, because over here we said that, Abba Shaul, he is still within Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, that you need 3 times. 3 times what? 3 times Malkuyot. That's why he says you have to sin a fourth time. But in this Baraita, there never is Malkuyot. No one gets lashes because he never accepted the warning, so there are no lashes. So here it's clear that we're talking about the Averah that is repeated. So how can you explain Abba Shaul according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? Or according to anybody, how can you explain Abba Shaul? Why would he need a fourth time? Right? Malkut leka. So over here, there is no Malkut, so we can't interpret it that Abba Shaul requires 3 times Malkut. So how can we explain it? The question is, do you need a separate warning to put someone into the kippah, into jail? Does it have to be a warning, say, listen, don't do it again, because this time, if you do the same sin, you're not going to get lashes, you're going to be put into the kippah. That's the question, whether you need a warning for that or not. So everybody, in fact, is within Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that you need 3 times. And 3 times for what? 3 times for a sin. You have to sin 3 times to make a chazakah. Fine, that's perfectly good for Tanna Kama. He says as follows, you sinned, they gave you a warning for lashes, but he didn't listen. So he sins twice, sins 3 times. You sinned 3 times, and you didn't listen to the warning. You didn't get lashes, but because you sinned 3 times, immediately we put you into the kippah. That's it. Abba Shaul says, okay, you gave him a warning, he didn't listen to the warning. So you gave him lashes. You didn't give him lashes 3 times because you couldn't, because there was no warning. But now you can't just put him into the kippah after the 3rd time he sinned, because he never got a warning that he's going to be put into a small cell and given nutrition that's going to kill him. He wasn't warned about that. So you have to wait till he sins a 4th time, and before he sins a 4th time, you give him a warning. You're going to go into the kippah, and whether he accepts it or not, he heard it, and then you put him into the kippah. And he sinned so many times that's it. There's no help for this guy, and so nothing else is going to make him make teshuvah, and therefore that's it. He gave himself up to the death penalty just by sinning so many times. But you still have to do a 4th time, not because of chazakah. The chazakah you already had with 3 times sinning, but rather you need another warning that's specifically for putting him into a kippah. Well, my kippah, we've discussed this the whole time, but we never actually described what a kippah is. Amar Yehuda, melo komato. It's a chamber that's only the height of the transgressor, but that's it. The width, he can't move, he can't lie down. All he could do is stand up. So that's one form of torture. Where is this hinted to in Tanakh? From this pasuk in Tehillim, evil shall kill the wicked. His evil finds him his own death, right? Because he did a sin so many times, he certainly deserves to die. So we have to find a way to kill him, even though he gets off on a technicality of terms of capital punishment because he didn't do something deserving of capital punishment. But he sinned so many times, and really it's karet, so he really does deserve it. And so we find a way, even though we can't do it in the normal 4 types of capital punishment. ואמר יש לקיש מה דכתיב? כי גם לא ידע האדם את עיתו כדגים שנאחזים במסודה רעה. מהי מסודה רעה? אמר יש לקיש חכה. And Shakish says, what is the meaning of this pasuk in Kohelet? For a man also knows not his time, like fish snared in an evil net. What does that mean, an evil net? Shakish says a hook. It's small and the fish is big, but nevertheless you can't escape it. So it's a simple contraption, and yet it causes a lot of damage. And so to this guy, he did something terrible, and his punishment will catch up with him. He's not going to get away with it just because he doesn't answer or because he's doing things that aren't technically capital punishment, but he keeps doing it. But he really deserves capital punishment because it is karet, and is a regular sinner. He made a chazakah upon himself. It's clear that he doesn't care about his own life, and therefore he's worthy of this type of punishment. And since we're talking already about extrajudicial punishments, we continue on that theme with the next Mishnah. Someone who commits murder not in front of witnesses, but somehow we know that he did murder, except that we don't have the 2 proper witnesses and the whole procedure, so we can't give him official capital punishment, but we know he did it. So then this person, we put him into the kippah, and we give him just a little bit of bread and a little bit of water, just barely enough, so we're not actually starving him to death. Okay, so we have to explain this, because this is also a kippah, but it's a different diet than before when we said barley. So first of all, minayad inan. Wait, if he killed someone, how do you know? If there were no witnesses, how do you know he killed someone, right? They didn't have video cameras, so on what basis are you going to put him to death if there aren't 2 witnesses? Rav says, this is talking about a case of disjointed testimony. There are 2 witnesses, but the 2 witnesses are not standing together, so they don't see the same vantage point and they don't see each other, which is a requirement for official 2 witnesses. But they're seeing from different points of view and they can't see each other. So there are in fact 2 witnesses, but we can't give them official capital punishment because they're disjointed. So we put him into the kippah and let him die there. Shmuel says, no, we're talking about 2 witnesses that saw him, but they didn't give him proper warning. It could be that they gave him a warning, but he did not acknowledge it and say, yes, I know, and almanat ken. So we can't give him capital punishment based on that technicality. But the 2 witnesses saw that he did it and we accepted their testimony. And so therefore we kill him in this other way. Rav Chisda amar avimi, כגון דתכחוש בבדיקות ולא התכחוש בחקירות, כדתנן מעשה בדק בן זכאי באוקסי תאנים. Or a third answer, how do we know that he did murder if there aren't 2 witnesses? Answer, there are 2 witnesses, but when we brought the 2 witnesses, they had a contradiction. The contradiction was not in the chakirot. The chakirot are the basic questions of where, when, right? Tell us the exact details of the crime itself. And there, if they contradict, well, if they got a different day, then they're not talking about the same thing, we definitely throw it out. But let's say they agree on all the essential questions called the chakirot, but they disagree about the bidikot. They asked them, what color was his sweater? And they say, one says blue, one says green. Well, that's not essential for the crime. So that's a side point. Now, if they disagree regarding bidikot in a capital case, then it's true, we cannot officially accept their testimony to give the person official capital punishment of one of the 4 ways. However, they still, since they agreed with the chakirot, we do trust them and know that it's true. And that's why we put them into a kippah. And how do you know that? We check with bidikot, meaning side points. We know that from the Mishnah that tells us that Ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, one time there was some kind of crime that was under a fig tree. And Ben Zakkai asked them about how big were the stems of the figs on the fig tree beneath which this crime happened. And they didn't know. One said, it was this thick. One said it was a little thinner. And so he said, no, we're not going to kill these people. So we see Ben Zakkai would ask even about tiny incidental details. And so we learn that bidikot, in fact, if there's any contradiction in bidikot in a capital case, then you cannot give them official capital punishment. But doesn't mean that they walk away free. We'll put them into the kippah instead. dekatane machilin oto seorim ad shekereso mitbakaat. So over here it says we put them into kili kippah and we give him a little bit of bread and water. How come over here it says we give him a little bit of bread and water, but previously in the Braita we learned that we give him barley, enough barley until his belly will break open. So which one is it? And Rav Sheshet says it's actually both. One after the other. Notnim lo lechem saru ma'im lachas ad sheyuktan ma'ayano. Behadar machilin oto seorin ad shekereso mitbakaat. First, we give him a little bit of bread and only a little bit of water so that his belly will become smaller and smaller. Now that he has a small belly, then we give him barley and the barley will expand and then that will cause his belly to rupture. I think personally I'd rather get one of the forms of capital punishment. They seem a lot quicker and less suffering than going into a kippah. And now for the next Mishnah that continues on the theme of extrajudicial punishments. Hagonevet hakasva v'mkalel bakosem v'boel aramit kana'in pogim bo. Someone who steals a kasva, that's some kind of vessel from the Bet HaMikdash. One interpretation is that on the shulchan in the Bet HaMikdash, upon which they put the lechem apanim, you had these panels on the side and tubes that went from one panel to the other side, and the bread would rest on those tubes, kind of like shelves, so that they wouldn't smash each other. So that is one interpretation of kasva, because it does come up in Bemidbar 4:7 when the Torah is describing the shulchan itself. So someone who steals that, or someone who curses with the name of a sorcerer, so some kind of curse in the name of some idol or sorcerer, and someone who has relations with an Aramit, with a non-Jewish woman. On all these, there's no official punishment in Beit Din, but rather zealots come and kill him extrajudicially. כהן ששימש בטומאה, אין נחב הכהן מביאין אותו לבית דין, אלא פרחי כהונה מוציאין אותו לחוץ לעזרה, ומפסיעין את מוחו בגזירין. If a Kohen is tameh, and he shows up in the Bet HaMikdash to serve in the Bet HaMikdash while he's tameh, his brethren, other Kohanim, do not bring him to Bet Din. Rather, the young Kohanim, they bring him outside. They take him outside because when they kill him, they don't want there to be tumat met in the Bet HaMikdash. And so they take him outside to the courtyard and they split his head open with a piece of wood or with a club. Zar sheshimesh b'mikdash. Rabbi Akiva omer b'chenek hachamim omrim b'idei shamayim. If a non-Kohen comes and serves in the mikdash, Rabbi Akiva says he gets the death penalty b'chenek. Chachamim say that he gets the death penalty only at the hands of heaven. Now, my kasva, what is the vessel that is mentioned that's called kasva? Amar Yudah kli sharet v'chen omer ve'et kesot hanasech. It's some vessel in the Bet HaMikdash, as the pasuk says, the kesot, jars or tubes or something like that, with which to pour libations. So maybe it has something to do with libations. That's another interpretation. There are these cups that are on the shulchan that hold some frankincense. So anyway, some kind of vessel that has to do with the shulchan. וכן הוא אומר את כסות הנסך, והיכא רמיזה, ולא יבואו לראות כבעלה את הקודש המתו. Where is it hinted that someone who steals this type of item deserves death by zealots, because later on in that same perek it says that when the Levim are going to carry these vessels that go in the Kodesh, so the Levim should not go in the Kodesh and get them, because Levim aren't allowed. Rather, the Kohanim should bring them out to the Levim, and so that they don't come to see the sacred items as they're being covered lest they die. That's the simple interpretation, but kebala, covered, can also mean to take, to swallow, to steal. And so if they steal something, vametu, then you have to kill them. And it's not by a court, but rather by zealots that see them. V'amkalel bakosem taneh Rav Yosef, yakeh kosem et kosmo. Rabbanan v'itema Rabba bar Mari amri, yakehu kosem lo ulkono ulmakno. Two interpretations about what this means. One who curses with a sorcerer, Rav Yosef says, if he says, let the sorcerer strike his sorcerer, or let the sorcerer strike his maker, meaning that he's cursing the name of God by some idol, that he's seems to be recognizing that the idol gets its own power from God, but he's asking this sorcery power to curse the power that gives it the sorcery power, meaning God. So this person deserves death penalty by zealots. Whereas Rabbanan say, or others say, Rabba Mamari says, no, when it's talking about someone who curses someone else. As someone curses another person who doesn't like, and he says, let this, he names a sorcerer or a name of an idol, strike this person along with his creator and his provider. So he's cursing the person as well as God in the name of some sorcery power. So that's the case where we have zealots kill him. The Boel Aramit we will leave to the next stuff. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.